this presentation actually, um, it comes from other presentations and so forth that I do. I think a lot of us are aware that much of our work comes from do-it-yourselfers, handymen, and house flippers. Without them, we would only be looking at professional work, and I would bet our work would drop off quite a bit, but who knows? Um, I put this together in a presentation, or some of these defects and all, in a presentation. I call it inspector porn. And it's just kind of a joke. A lot of guys I've noticed in the 20s plus years that I've been in home inspection, guys will bounce these pictures back. I still see pictures come across my screen from time to time that I saw 20 years ago, but they bounce them around. Every now and then somebody will even claim they're their own. So if I actually have a picture pop up and your name has not been credited to it, I apologize. I usually am pretty good about crediting things. But anyway, these things are usually pretty clear that there's some problems. I thought I would elaborate on some of them and get into them a little bit more, primarily because of my 50 plus years in plumbing and heating. Thought I could talk to you about some of these things a little more, tell you maybe the evolution of some of these, how some of these things have come about, and how some of the things that we know are defects today, um, 25 years ago, something like that, we didn't think of them as defects. We would actually install some of this stuff. I can tell you, plumbers are more educated now than they have been. Same with HVAC guys. HVAC has definitely become more technical than than it was 25, 30 years ago, for sure. Again, a lot of our work comes from do-it-yourselfers, handymen, house flippers. I haven't been paying much attention lately if the house flipper craze is as much as it was a few years back, but it seemed like not that long ago, somebody would buy a house, paint it, and then try to make $40,000 profit on it. And every now and then you would find somebody that would really get in there and work the house over. I'm sure they thought they were doing things right in many cases, but they often were not, or they were actually creating something pretty dangerous. Uh, I learned about something too that I can't remember exactly where I got it from, a magazine, I think it was talked about how a lot of handyman, and I know these guys. I've been knowing this type of guy for many, many years. They will go to a Home Depot or a Lowe's, someplace like that, and walk through the store with a homeowner or somebody that wants to hire them, and they will buy everything that guy tells them to buy. Normally, we're talking about wood and lumber, things like that, and then plumbing supplies and fixtures and whatever. And every now and then I'd get a kick out of it because the guy would come back in and he would throw all these tools down, and you would look and you'd realize he bought him a miter saw as well. So he might have got paid through with some tools in some cases. But anyway, this was actually labeled "Buy It Yourself." It's a buy it yourselfer project, and you would just go through the store, and just point out what you wanted, and the people would pay for it. In most cases, they'd be using a credit card, and they would hopefully get the work done. It didn't guarantee anything. Most of the guys that were doing this with them, probably weren't real legit. They weren't guys that were licensed and insured and things like that. But they're going to offer these people such a great deal. The people felt like it was worth the chance. Um, Do-it-yourselfers, flippers, and so forth. A lot of times, just people watching television. There's so many television shows on that will tell you how to do things. I've recently got into YouTube more. I've been watching maker networks and stuff like that at some things. But anyway, all these shows all tell you you can do things that many of you, or many people cannot do, but they would tell you you could. And the main thing that they had going is that they figured if you did it, that you would have to go to their store. And in most cases, we're talking big box stores, Lowe's and Home Depot, and you would buy the material from them. So that's, basically what they got. I've also seen situations or houses where I would walk in and this guy would be maybe an accountant, an attorney or something like that. And you would go in and they had better tools than you did. I mean, I remember walking into a house one time and the guy had a machine shop essentially set up. He could cut and thread pipe and do all this stuff. He was a mechanical engineer. He didn't do the everyday work for a living. I guess he could do it, but he had such great tools. We had a blast just working for the guy because we loved hanging out in his shop. We made sure we had lunch there and things like that. Anyway, we all know what we're talking about when we go to the do-it-yourselfers and the house flippers places. Normally you could, a house flipper, a lot of times you could tell as soon as you got there that something weren't right, because the roof, you would see the lines on the roof weren't lining up. Here's the picture here of that. Or when you're in the attic, though, you could tell maybe a do-it-yourself, or the insulation might be put in upside down. Sometimes you're under the house. I know many of us have been crawling along a crawl space, and you look at you're looking at the insulation and you realize you're looking at something that says this side toward, the inside of the house, or toward the warm space. And it goes in so well the other way, people would do it that way. Anyway, I'm gonna focus mainly plumbing and HVAC. I get asked this all the time. Should I absolutely use purple primers up? Well, the rules, as I understand it, and a lot of things are different. Depends on where you are in the country, but a lot of things have changed. I was a firm believer, and I always have been a firm believer in the primer and the glue. Though I will tell you, in the 70s, maybe early 80s, when I first started into the business, we mainly just used the glue on PVC. You really do want to use the primer for things like a pressure type pipe. Like if you're going to use PVC for the main water supply, you really want to see some primer on there to make sure it's going to hold up good. As far as DWV stuff is concerned, some areas may still be requiring it, but a lot of areas don't if it's drainage. If it's just drain pipe. I will say that I have found leaks on far more joints that didn't have the primer than the ones that did not. And what I mean by that is I would go to houses to look for leaks. I'd go there trying to figure out what was going on. And when I was there, sometimes I'd have to open up a wall or something, and I would open up a wall, and sure enough, I might find a pipe that's under stress. The joint has pulled a little bit, and I often wonder, well, if it had been primer on there, would it have pulled apart as well? I do know this, that when you primed it and you glued it and you stuck it together, you had to do the deed really quick. You had to get it together because it would set up really fast. And I did find a much better result if the joint was primed. Now there's a procedure for this. I get a kick out of looking at the guy. He's chamfering the pipe and he's cleaning it up and stuff like that. I can honestly tell you that tool that guy has, well, number one, I'd never seen that tool on a job ever. I just stuff like that just never happened. It's just like when we get a call to go do an inspection, and when you get there, somebody starts talking about, well, I really didn't think I needed an inspection because the city provided an inspection, and I believe that was good enough, and so I just didn't think I needed inspection. I think I've said this on this group before. In 50 plus years in the plumbing business, I never had a plumbing inspector go under the house. And I plumbed a lot of houses over the years. I never had one crawl up under the house. When the insurance companies were involved with polybutylene, if the leaks were under the house, I almost never would get them to go further than maybe a foot or so in the hole to look toward the leak. I learned early on, if you brought a pair of coveralls with you to reach out to the guys, say, here, I bought you some coveralls if you needed them to go under the house, they would say, no, that's okay, I believe you. So I guess the perception is, all these guys are going to do these things. They're going to go up under the house when the chances are the original plumber was the guy that went under there and that was it. And so some of the pictures we're going to look at are going to be things that would have certainly been caught if there had been an inspection and the inspector did indeed go up under the house. But as I said, I'm in Hampton Roads, Virginia. I never had one go under there. It just never happened. Now, one of the things about purple primer is it gets on everything. I make a joke about how you can crack a can open at your truck and you can put it in a paint can and seal the lid up on the paint can and then put that can into one of those big Home Depot buckets and snap the lid on it and then put it in the garbage can, and you can tape the lid on the garbage can lid and you can walk through the people's house and take that can of purple primer into the bathroom, and then when you set it down, turn and look behind you and there would be purple primer all over the house. That's just because that stuff gets on everything. And I know for a fact I've paid for damage from either my guys damaging stuff with the purple primer, or and I know other companies have done so. You all of a sudden you realize, where the heck did that purple spot come from on that white carpet? Well, you knew it was you. You were the only one there with the stuff. But I did notice, they make a all-in-one glue, and it is actually sold as a kind of a do-it-yourselfer type product. And so that's kind of cool because the purple primer wasn't an issue there, but they were actually promoting this for the do-it-yourselfer. And so, a do-it-yourselfer doesn't have to worry about the primer, so forth. But again, personally, I've always found that it worked better. If your area requires it, obviously the purple was there, so they would know you used primer. But if it didn't require it, I don't have any issues on regular drain pipe normally. But water pipe, I think the requirement still is on that you need to have something on some pressure pipe. You need to have some primer used on that. Here's something. I'm still talking about plastic pipe. And I have home inspectors call this out every now and then. If they see metal straps on this pipe, they get a little worked up over it. But let me tell you, this pipe, this strap like that is not going to be that way very long. If the screw doesn't pull through, the strap's going to break, and it's just got way too much space on it. And this stuff, 20 pounds. I mean, it doesn't hold a lot. I've had people actually strap up ductwork with it before, and too much weight on a duct, and all of a sudden you could hear a duct strap break, and then you would hear another duct strap break, because as things begin to settle, it would just snap this stuff. The metal straps, this is galvanized steel, 24 gauge, 750 pounds it would hold. And if you put it on flat, I like to use stove bolts, 1/4-inch stove bolts, when I would wrap around the pipe to make sure that the strap couldn't shift and cause any damage. But it's there to stay. Some metal straps over the years, or if they're under a house, in our area, we have a lot of moisture. So you're going to, over time, you might have some straps get pretty bad, but you're talking about a long time. You're probably 20 some years into it before you start really having any real issues with it. And then it's just a matter of replacing a strap. In our area, they like to do a stiff arm, take a 2x4, nail it to a floor joist, let it hang down, pull the pipe up under the stiff arm. That piece of 2x4 hanging down and just wrap a strap around it, and it would hold for many, many, many years. And then, like I said, if it started giving you a problem, or if you started rusting them out, it's pretty easy to go under there and just restrap some things. Some guys would actually do it when they were under there making another repair. If they saw that this was going to be a problem, they would go ahead and do that. But anyway, the lack of strap on this material, especially 3-inch and greater, Schedule 40. I mean, foam core is a little lighter. But anyway, 3-inch and 4-inch pipe and stuff like that, there's a lot of weight there. You want to get those straps, on to make sure that it's really supported well. This one here, I don't see anybody getting on top of it, but if it was running through a crawl space or something like that, somebody could get on that pretty easily. So look for that. Make sure it is really strapped good. Many times I've had people say the drains were gurgling, and I crawled under the house, and they had this big dip in the pipe or something like that. You lift it up, and you could hear the water run out. But and you strap it, and the problem went away. And if this happened on HVAC stuff, you could get a dip in an HVAC pipe, the vent pipe, to the point where it would fill up with water and shut the system down.
So, Kenny, we got a couple questions here.
Okay.
If you could elaborate on the different solvents for PVC and CPVC, and then just maybe the spacing requirements for straps.
We're usually talking about 4 to 5 feet. And guys, I'm doing this off of memory right now. I haven't been in the field in years. But I'm one of those guys. I used to say I didn't take a tape measure under a house. I felt if you took a tape measure under the house, you were probably, really looking for things that might not be there. I'm not going to call something out for a few inches off or something like that, as long as it looked like it had good slope, it had no dips and things like that. I didn't call them out. As far as the every turn, I wanted to make sure if you had a long sweeping turn, I wanted to make sure I saw a strap on both sides of that turn. I wanted a good strong strap there. Sometimes, depending on the setup, you wouldn't necessarily need to stiff arm it, but in many cases you did. And like I said, we would just take a 2x4 and nail it to the floor joist. The floor joist would come down. We would pull like a 3-inch PVC pipe up to it and just put a strap around it to where we're more or less strapping it to the bottom of that 2x4 hanging down. Again, the main thing is you want to have a good slope. I don't mean necessarily a deep slope. I mean, we know if we overslope stuff, if you overslope things, especially on a soil line or something like that, you would have the water run off and leave the toilet paper, and it would cling into the pipe. But as far
Kenny,
as
Kenny, how real is that? I've heard that before. That about the slope. But you see pipes running on a 45-degree angle. So what's real?
Well, remember one thing: 45-degree or greater is considered vertical, and in most cases, whatever's there is going to fall. It's actually going to fall. I tell you, the biggest place, and we have an area here in Virginia Beach, in the north end of Virginia Beach. It's real high-end homes. It's called Princess Anne Hills. The houses are actually built way up on sand dunes. And a lot of our competition would come in, and they would be at this house way up on the hill, and they would just shoot that line straight down. It would be coming down that hill flying. And we had people complain about having blockages and things like that, things stopping up on them. And I worked with old-time plumbers. When I got into the business, I mean, I had a plumber that I worked for. He used to tell us about how he helped load the bomb on the Enola Gay. I mean, this is the generation I'm talking about. I used to always think that was BS too. One day I actually saw a TV show and they called his name out, and I almost fell out. But anyway, these guys were old school guys. They couldn't talk to you about the science or anything like that, but they knew good things. So when we got a call about that, and we would go check these houses, and we realized that they would just occasionally get stopped up, what we found was we would step the line down. We would dig that line up. We would use their pipe again, but we would raise everything up and put a slower incline on it and come down almost like in a stair step type fashion. And it always seemed the problem seemed to go away. So I mean, I'm assuming that, and is that the same thing that happens with maybe kitchen sink lines and things like that? Maybe. I
Looked
know
and
that.
looked.
Go ahead.
We looked for it in the code book and couldn't find it in the code. Something about that slope between what is it, a quarter inch to
Well,
a
it's
foot?
I don't have it in front of me, but there's a lot of, I mean, they talk about slope in several areas. They don't specifically say let it come down at I don't think it talks about, specifically, but I do know if that pipe is 45 degree or greater, if it's 45 degrees or greater, it's considered vertical, and vertical is not an issue. Vertical, most of that stuff will fall down. And
So I guess
really, I can honestly say that the times that I ever had a problem with that, the times that I had a problem with that would be in the sewer. It would be in the sewer. And I will tell you something else. We have since PVC came out. Now you're talking to a guy that used to put in cast iron. I used to do cast iron. Cast iron stops up way more than PVC and ABS and the plastic. Way,
more
way more.
friction. It's a
Yeah,
rougher
I mean it's
surface,
just way
creates more
more. I mean,
friction.
over the years, cast iron gets really rough. And so does galvanized steel. We know that those two get pretty bad. I've gone in and unstopped PVC lines 30 years later, and they were still fine. Usually if I had a line that was plugged up with that, they overloaded it. They put too much down the drain, or they flushed a diaper down there, or they did something they weren't supposed to, unless it was, let's say, a wash machine and a kitchen sink line that came together, and they were pumping a lot of grease in there, and it was setting up in the line. It could do that,
So
but regular stuff, nowhere near as many problems with PVC.
So Kenny, we opened a can of worms here, okay? Because
Well, there's
what
a
you're
lot of
getting
worms
at,
here to go over, so
yeah, okay. Well, that's good. No, that's good. That's why we're here, right? So the code says there's a minimum slope, right? You have to have at least
mm,
what is it, a quarter of an inch to a foot or something, right? You have to have, there's a minimum, but there's no maximum in the code. But you're telling us that from your experience,
yeah.
that a slope that's what, an inch to a foot or something like that is problematic because the water moves so fast that it doesn't self-cleanse the pipe.
Oh, it's the
But
different, the different products. The paper would, I guess, the weight of the paper and the waste, would hold onto the pipe, and the water would separate it. Now, and understand something. That's not just me. If you've ever taken the Carson Dunlap course, for instance, there's a section on that actually has the pipe, and they got these cute little, well, birds separating from the water in some of their images. So I mean,
no,
it is,
I'm with you on
it,
all of that. I'm with you on all of that. But
okay.
let's put this.
It is a thing.
Yeah, it is
Now,
a real thing.
let me tell you something though. Is it something that I would call out on a day-to-day basis? Probably not. What I would probably do is that would be a call that I would get, even as a lot of us, we get really tight with our clients, and they call us for all kinds of stuff. They call us for a lot of different things, and some of them would call me and say, "Hey, I'm having a problem with a certain thing," and I would go in and look at it. And sometimes, if they were having a problem with a particular drain, and then it had a really heavy slope on it, that would be one of my
So
suggestions.
we're leaving the home inspectors with the question: what does a home inspector do with this information?
Your home inspector should be concerned, primarily concerned with the support of the pipe. You don't want it to dip. You don't want it, you don't want it to sag. You don't want it to hump up. Especially what we're looking at today. If you go into a house that's 50 years old and you're calling out crap that went in when it was installed 50 years ago, you're going to have problems, justifying some of these things, obviously. But if you go into a brand new home and you see some things, my thing would be on the pipe would actually be the support. Way more than I would the slope. What I'm talking to you about the slope though is I know it happens because it happens on main lines. We don't see main lines. So is it possible for it to happen in a line under a house? I would think so. But again, what I also said was it doesn't, it's, the drainage problems are nowhere near as bad on PVC and ABS plastic as it is on cast iron, older stuff, a lot of the older stuff. So, I mean, that's what I'm telling you. What if I didn't see a PVC pipe supported well, I would definitely be concerned, because if it's in a place where somebody's going to accidentally put some weight on it when you crawl up under the house or something like that, and it starts breaking, it'll continue to sag. As far as the plastic strap, for instance, I would never use plastic strap on a PVC drain. I wouldn't use it. It just doesn't hold up well, and it causes it'll cause you a problem at some point. As far as the slope, what I would do when I was plumbing a house, I would have a gradual slope go to about the place where it was going to make a turn or needed to go down, and then I would drop it down with like a 45. I would drop down with the 45, go down several feet with the 45, and then level it out. I wouldn't just be one large continuous slope. I would bring it at a nice, smooth pace. I've actually stood and looked in cleanouts, when I work unstopping drains or something like that. I've actually looked down the clean out in the front yard or something like that. And there are cases where I would actually see water coming by sometimes, and then some paper and maybe a little bit of water with it. But you can tell there was some kind of separation going on there. But again, this would be more outside than anywhere else. As far as this goes, the main thing here is, make sure it's strapped well. Don't worry about damaging the pipe with a metal strap or something like that. I'll get people that send me pictures and say, was this metal strap going to damage this pipe? I've never seen a metal strap that was installed properly cut into a plastic pipe. It's just,
So
I've talked about this.
Kenny, another question that comes up is, so where are cleanouts required?
It used to be about every 50 feet or where you made a turn. What happened was, where you would make like a greater than a 45-degree turn. What happened was, even in sewers out in the front of the houses, they reduced that down and to a shorter, you didn't have to have cleanouts as often, because uh, drain snakes are way better than they used to be. We used to use push tapes. We used to use these flat rods that we would push through drains, and you needed one every 50 feet or so. Today, these snakes they'll tie themselves up in a knot and go around corners and do all kinds of stuff. Where you really want to have one like it, every drain, you basically, like when you're in the crawl space, you really want to see a clean out somewhere on that line. Some people will put them at the base of a stack, which used to be the requirement at the base of the stack, where some guys will come in, they'll have a long, sweet plastic elbow or something like that, and they'll put a test tee in the line. That's good. You can unstop it from that. It'll do fine. It'll open right up. Those, the plastic drains, and as long as you're using DWV fittings, you're not using pressure fittings, you'll be fine. The pressure, you can get the snake to go around it. I did something underneath sinks that a lot of guys wouldn't do. Some guys might even call it out as a problem. I would put a no hook band on a piece of plastic pipe. It came out of the wall and underneath the sink, and I would put a no hook band, and then I would pipe the drain to a double sink or whatever, and it would be done that way. So if I had to unstop the drain, I would actually loosen both fittings up at the basket strainer, loosen up the no-hub band, and drop all the drain pipe out from under the sink and snake it from there. That meant that Kenny didn't have to go under the house, because I could do it from there, and it worked fine. It's worked fine for years. You just remember, plastic is going to be the plastic that we use today, and the gradual turns that we have. Again, they're not sharp 90s like you would have on a pressure line or something like that. The snakes will go around them fine. but you want to be able to see at least a clean out somewhere. I mean, you're not going to see anything in the wall, let's face it. If it's on a concrete slab, you're not going to see anything below the slab. You might see something sticking out of the wall, but concrete slabs are, we don't see a lot of the system. But you're in a crawl space. Every stack that I see coming down, kind of look to see if they got a clean out on there somewhere where they, somewhere where they can get at the thing. It used to be we would just drop right down into a combination fitting and have a clean out in the tail end of it, and that would be how we would run it. Now, as things changed over the years, some guys like the idea of letting it drop down into a long sweeping elbow and just in the vertical, they would put a test tee fitting in there. It's a tee that's just a plug. And the value of that is you could snake it downward, but you could also snake that up. It's like it would work the same way as a two-way clean out does in your front yard. A two-way clean out in the front yard is great as long as you understand the layout of the plumbing in the house. What would happen on a two-way clean out is you go open the two-way clean out, look in it. If you don't have any water coming to you, yet everything's stopped up in the house, you knew it was stopped up under the, back toward the house, and you would run the snake that way. If you took the plug out and the water gushed up out of it, out there in the yard, you knew that it was stopped up between where you were and the street. And you would just go ahead and snake it toward the street. You didn't have to worry too much when you snaked it, and when you would snake it in that direction. When you snake it in the other direction, your concern is, because some people do just use some elbows, some long sweeping fittings under the house. If you push the snake in there too hard, you might come up under a drain like a toilet. I've seen people take a rotor rooter type machine and go in this thing backwards, go up under the house, and not judge the distance that they had. And it would actually work its way into some type of a fixture situation and do some damage. You could break a toilet if it was at the tail end of a clean out, or tail end of the system, the high end of the system under the house. You could do
So
that.
Kenny,
But
what's the best way? What's the best way to connect cast iron to plastic?
Fernco coupling, that's what I would always use.
Is there another way?
There are different fittings. You can use a cast iron fitting with a spigot, a hub and spigot type thing, and you can pull the plastic into the hub that way. You could do that, but that's a pain in the butt. I mean, you got to really work to get that thing in there. But whereas you use a Fernco coupling or a no hub coupling with a strong back that has the heavy stainless steel around it or something like that, that would be fine. But I mean, I hear some people complain about Fernco couplings. I've never had a problem with a Fernco if it was put on properly. Now, there's another brand out here. There was a brand out here, I think it's called American or something like that, and you would get it at Lowe's. Home Depot would sell the other ones, the Ferncos. I would torque those American ones up. They're supposed to have like 60 pounds of torque. The torque wrench puts that much torque on it. I torque them up and then come back the next day and go under the house to do some more work and realize that the strap was off. It had broke. It couldn't handle the tension. But I never had that problem with a Fernco. The inside dimensions are essentially, they're the same. You get them as close together as you can and use the Fernco to transition, and then it's fine. When you really question it, did it do it yourself or do it or something like that, is when you have a difference in the size of the pipe and they don't realize that they can buy a transition fitting, and they'll try to even out the thickness of the pipe with like duct tape or something like that, and then put some kind of a coupling band or something like that over it. But I would promise you 90% of the guys that are out here doing that kind of work, they're going to just, they're going to have an assortment of those on the truck. They will have an assortment. Let me move on a little bit, because I do have a few pictures that I can point out something that a different state of mind between a guy that does it every day. I threw this picture in there. This is really, somebody thought that, I guess they thought that they could vent their gas water heater with PVC, and honestly, that looks like electrical tape. And of course, there's some tension on it; it melted or whatever. Plus, the other thing that's wrong there is, normally you're going to, the thing that most guys would call out immediately would be the fact that the polybutylene, I mean, excuse me, the PEX is too close to the flue, and that heat is going to work on that, is going to heat that pipe up, and it's going to, cause it to fail. This probably didn't have that long, being connected, and it was the vent was coming off of it, and so it probably had to have some work done on it pretty early. Hopefully, they changed the PEX at the same time. Transitioning between the two, again, a no hub band, maybe occasionally a Frenco, something like that. That worked very well. But I like Odie products. Odie makes some really good chemicals, and they have a green transition glue. The last time I checked, it still wasn't specifically stated on it, code approved or whatever. But I've used it in some places, crawl space or something like that, and I never had any trouble with it. I just didn't have any trouble with it. And if I saw a fitting or two or something like that where somebody transitioned onto an old fitting, and if it wasn't under a lot of stress and stuff like that, again, I probably wouldn't call it out. I just didn't find that to be that big a problem. And if it did leak, somebody would catch and we're not talking about a complete failure. Normally what you would be talking about is a drip or something like that coming off of it. It would probably be because they just didn't put it on right. They didn't put enough in there. But the ABS to PVC green glue is again, I haven't seen any of them that had approval written on it yet, but I do trust their products. I
So
definitely
Kenny,
trust their.
in your last picture, you were showing the PEX pipe coming off the top of the water heater. So
Yeah.
what is supposed to be a metal? It's supposed to be metal, right?
18 inch, usually 18 inches. Yeah, a lot of guys will use one of those metal connectors or something like that. Um, an 18-inch copper, a section of copper pipe, screwed into that, and then transition over. By then you could
So
get away from the flue. That would be
so
the way to go.
is that true with electric water heaters?
No, what you're worried about the heat on here would be what you're worried about the heat on here would be from the flue, coming out of the flue itself.
At the
I mean,
draft head.
some areas, actually, Hollis, you and I were in a house one time together with someone that had polybutylene go directly into their electric water heater and came out of the TPR valve. And it was the first time I had ever seen it. But we were in this house together in a house in a southern state, and I saw this and I thought, well, that's a little different. I just didn't see much of that.
So
But to
Kenny,
make
that was a strange experience, that you and me being at that house together, because while I was away and you were home alone, yeah, as a guest, you were poking around that house, making a list and taking pictures.
and the guy that lived in the house was a home inspector. But it happened to be in the closet at the bedroom where I was in the bedroom. So anyway, but I mean, I pay a lot of attention to stuff when I'm out, like I said, today I don't pay attention to any of it. I got to be perfectly honest with you guys. My days are done. If you saw Kenny Hart out here on an inspection today, it's probably because I live in that house or I fell out of an airplane or something and went down their chimney. I'm not going in there to inspect anymore. I'm too damn old and too beat up. I can't do that anymore. But I could, I'm still having memories of stuff and I still talk about it and I offer advice. I still get a lot of requests for advice and stuff like that. And I'm willing to give it, but I will admit there's some new stuff coming out that's I'm almost envious of some of the new guys in HVAC because they're getting to see some stuff I never got to see. And in my mind, I think I knew that somebody could do something. That could definitely be a thing. And now I'm basically retired, done with all this stuff, and they're doing it because the technology in every business I know, but in this business is changed to the point where it just fascinates me. It
You
does
know, all kinds
fascinate
of
me.
new cool gadgets too.
Oh yeah. Oh, the testing stuff. You see home inspectors will come into a house, 2 or 3 bags of tools and sit them down. I got to be honest with you. When I was inspecting houses, with the exception of my ladders, I could pretty much carry everything I needed in my pocket. And some people say, well, you can't really do a good inspection that way. Well, I inspected for 20 some years, I made a couple of bad calls, but it had nothing to do with tools. It had a lot to do with Kenny being tired. And I didn't find myself in court on anything. So I figured, hey, I mean, I was old school inspector. Home inspectors didn't do half the stuff 25 years ago that we do today. But I mean, a lot of it is what you know, probably more than other things. Look at this here. We find a drain off, missing trap from time to time in a crawl space. And I used to find these, what we called them was the 11th month inspection. They would have their house inspected 11 months in because their warranty was going to be over, the following month or something like that. And it was especially important if they didn't get an inspection right after they took possession of the house. If they didn't get an inspection, or right when they were taking possession of the house, they didn't get inspection. You go into a crawl space and you would find a missing trap. You're not going to have that in the house because it's going to show up real quick. But I've been in crawl spaces and realized, man, that thing's been doing that for 11 months. It's been dumping a whole tub of water at a time, a whole shower or something like that. And so that was something that, happened. Now, I put this picture of this fitting next to it in there for this. When back in the day, we used to put an access panel in the wall to get to a tub or a shower or whatever. The reason you put it behind a tub would be if you would have those fittings, that type of fitting on the drain. In other words, mechanical joints. You need to have access to the joints. You don't have to put cutoffs behind tubs and showers. Personally, as a plumber, I rarely used a shutoff valve in the house. We knew that if you used it and it failed, you would have to be there, a lot longer working on something. So what we always did was we just cut it off at the street. And I will tell you, a lot of plumbers will cut the water off at the street at the meter. Now if you have well water, obviously you're going to cut off a valve somewhere at the pump. But we would do that. So you don't need the panel behind there, but if you've got mechanical joints back behind it, now this would be above the floor, this wouldn't be below the crawl space here, but if you have mechanical joints, and I'm assuming that does all the way up that T, there should be an access panel behind it. I'm asked that a lot. Well, why don't we do that anymore? We used to put them back there. Well, the reason we put them there back in the olden days was because we had a shut-off valve. We would put a shut-off valve back there, but at some point somebody realized, two more valves or two more places to have problems. And it's just easy to shut the water off at one main valve or shut the water off, at the street. And like I said, in my case, it was going to be at the street. But anyway, if you've got mechanical joints on the drains, that's why you need the panels back there. We have so many ways to connect pipe. To be honest with you, so many ways to join. Look at all these different ways just to join, PEX, and it was similar. Polybutylene would have been similar. That do-it-yourselfers go crazy. I got this from Roger Williamson a long time ago, and I used it in a presentation. And I'm looking at this thing, and I'm like, oh my God, this is just crazy. Well, this I'm sure was a do-it-yourselfer. He could go to the hardware store, he could buy these things, he could put stuff together, and hey, when you turn on the faucet, if water came out of it, it was good. As far as they were concerned. I mean, that's the way I know guys now that inspect a house. If they don't see a water dripping from somewhere, that house is in good shape. That's what how some people look at things. Look at this CPVC. They actually push the barbed fitting for PEX inside a piece of CPVC and crimp the ring on it. It's not made for that. But so they kind of combine things. But that's what happens. People will put things together and go, well, damn, it went together, so it must be right. I mean, I remember watching a video one time. It was on YouTube. It was a guy doing some electrical work, and when he got finished with it, he turned it on and the light came on, and he said, well, there you go. It must be right, or the light wouldn't have come on. And he had his hot and neutrals crossed and all kinds of stuff. And everybody that watched the video told him it was wrong. But I got the biggest kick out of it because you just assume because it came on, it was right. Now today we understand, like we use the light bulb example, the hot tab in the bottom and the threaded, that kind of stuff. We talk about the threaded portion, all of a sudden you're hot or whatever. But I will tell you something else, just kind of off topic a little bit. When you do hot and neutrals reverse today, on some equipment, some furnaces, they won't operate properly. In many cases, they won't come on at all if the hot and neutral wrong on that because of the electronics. Some of the electronics will keep it off. We've got a furnace right here in this classroom that I actually cross the wire sometimes just to show them won't come on. And the hot and neutral's reversed. It just won't come on at all. But you switch it back and everything is cool. So anyway, I got off on electrical. Electrical, it has nothing to do with plumbing or heating. Okay, look at the valve here. That's a PEX valve, or it may have been a polybutylene valve. That thread was the thread that screwed into that fitting is not a pipe thread like that. I promise you, it's not a pipe thread. I used to see them from time to time, but guess what? It worked. And if you're able to put Teflon tape on it and make it work, they just assume it's right. So, but that's where they took different things and put them together, and they got, what do you call them, shark bites on the other side, compression fittings, and I mean they got a little bit of everything there. That's definitely a do-it-yourselfer job, maybe a flipper job, but definitely a do-it-yourselfer job. If I use PEX or polybutylene, because I was involved in all that polybutylene stuff. I mean, I started using that stuff in the late 70s, early 80s, and I was still repiping houses in the 90s. I get asked all the time, what did I think about polybutylene? I think some people think it was some kind of a racket or something. And they'll say, Kenny, what did you think about polybutylene? Was it a joke? I tell them I love polybutylene. And the reason I loved it is because I got paid to put it in, I got paid to replace it, and now I get paid to talk about it. So I said, what the hell's not to like about it? It's great. But was there a problem? Absolutely. And it was not just the fittings. There were some problems with the pipe as well. But anyway, when I did it, I always would hard pipe, copper pipe, the riser to the shower and the drop down to the tub spout. I would always use copper for that, and it really sturdied up things. But like in this one here, they've got shark bites going up and down, and that valve can move to the left, it can move to the right. There's no braces on it. There's nothing there to really sturdy that thing up. So I always counted on that other stuff. I always counted on the hard pipe and solder joints and some bracing and stuff to really sturdy up the valve. And then the connections to the hot and the cold water, the PEX, it could move a little bit and it wasn't going to be a problem. They made some really good braces for the Delta type valves, the round valve bodies and stuff like that would go in there really good. And you find ways to do it. And I wasn't a guy that just put in plumbing, new construction. I was a repair guy. And so I would do stuff that would make it easier if I came back out there also to make a repair. And so I was always thinking about stuff like that. And I knew good and well that if the tub spout moved and the shower head moved, I was going to have a problem. Since then, you have to use screws on the shower head and things like that, in the wall. Used to, guys would just hammer a couple of roofing nails in there or something and move on. It's actually code to use some screws on the fitting for the shower head. It would be a drop ear nail, have two little holes in it. We would nail it. Now you're supposed to screw that thing into place because it'll get loose and cause some problems. This is more HVAC, but I saw this and I know that these fittings, the original fittings, shark bite fitting, they're rated at like 200 pounds of pressure or something like that. And I used to think that was it, but they actually, I don't have the picture of it here, but they might pop up in one of the other slides. They do make one that is rated for this now. It's rated at like 800 pounds of pressure. I went to look at it to see if it was approved for some of the newer refrigerants. And what I found was a whole lot of complaints about the fitting. I was amazed at how many, that you have your 5-star rating, and most of them were getting like a 1 or a 2. I had one guy that in his comments, he said, anybody want to buy some, I'll sell them cheap. I mean, apparently the fittings are, they're much heavier looking when you see one. They're heavier looking, but when you snap them all together, apparently they leak. Some of them leak. So be real careful if you do see the new shark bite for the HVAC lines. I would probably go at it if I had a sniffer or maybe some soap solution or something like that. I would probably hit it a little bit just to see, and only because I see so many complaints. Up to that point,
I'm starting,
I don't have any experience with them, but there's a lot of complaints. Yeah,
yeah,
go ahead,
I'm
Howard.
starting to hear plumbers are complaining about them.
Yeah, well, like I said, HVAC, you're talking a lot more pressure, and let's face it, there's 60% more pressure just with R410A than there was with R22, and then now we got all the new stuff, and so everything, you know everything's changing today. Everything's changing fast. Uh, this is something I find do-it-yourselfers use wrong a lot. They will rub or pound putty on a joint as if they're patching a leak. This stuff is more or less gasketing material. You put it under the rim of like that little pop up down at the bottom for a tub. You put it under the rim when you're making it up of that little fitting there. You do the same thing on the one at the top. The one at the top is a really good fitting for a kitchen sink drain, because when it's like a cup that's on the bottom of the thing. When it pushes up under the sink and pulls that big rim down on the top of the sink with that putty under it, it makes a really good connection. And it pulls it directly down. It doesn't spin it or anything like that. And so it holds up really well. But if you've got a leak or something and you think, well, I'm going to put plumber's putty on it, you're just wasting your time. It's not made for that. And it actually says on there for setting bowls, and we might be thinking of sinks and stuff like that. Guys, back in the day, plumbers set toilets in plumber's putty. You would have a huge container of plumber's putty, and sometimes you would actually use some plumber's putty, instead of a wax seal. Now, wax seals, you know, were definitely better. They came along, they're definitely better. There are, and there's plenty of other materials today that they make the seals out of and so forth. That's all changing. The biggest debate I see plumbers having over this stuff is whether to use plumber's putty under these fixtures, under the rims here, or to use silicone. These two guys go back and forth. I mean, I'm going to continue to use plumber's putty if I'm out there in the field. Why? Because I've done it my whole life. My dad did it. My dad used it. It held up well for us, and the usage of it is way, way less than it used to be. Plumbers used to use it for a lot more, but we never did pack it on a fitting, on the outside of a fitting. So if you see some of that stuff caked onto the outside of a fitting, it is not what it's designed to be used on. It's not used for that. It's more or less a gasketing material that you put underneath a joint. Real quickly, toilet stuff. A lot of guys don't even lift the lid off. I know, don't lift the lid off, but maybe just for yourself, you might you might look at something even on your own toilet. A lot of guys will do this. See the bolt? The toilet tank bolts have a big, huge head on there, and they pull down. They're supposed to be pulling down on a rubber washer. Guys get it confused, and they let it pull down on a metal washer, and then the metal washer to the rubber washer. Well, the joint between that brass head of that screw and then that metal washer has nothing to seal it right there, and it'll usually do two things. One, it'll leak pretty soon, even if it holds the first little bit of while. It'll start leaking, and it also, I call it mushrooming. It'll get great big chemical reaction will happen there, and it'll look like a big mushroom growing in the tank, and that'll be a problem. So it really does need the big head of that bolt needs to be pulled down onto a rubber washer. And
Is that
you'll
what's
have somebody
causing that, Kenny?
what's
Is that
that?
what's causing that? Is that what's causing that bulge of tan colored goo on top of those?
Well,
Is
a lot of times is God only knows what all these metals are. I mean, most of these little bags of junk like this are imports, but the brass and then that little it looks like a steel washer. When they go together, in no time, you'll have a thing on there as big as your thumb. It looks like it's growing on top of that bolt.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming it's where the two metals go together, but I do know that they will leak. So you go and buy a new kit, you change it, you fix it, you think you've done a good job, and you've just made that one little installation problem, and it's going to do the same thing again. Here's the same thing, a similar thing that you find. Black gasket here is supposed to be in the tank. Ball cock is supposed to go down through the black gasket. Then the white nut pulls it down under the toilet. You don't look up under there and see the gasket. The gasket it's supposed to be in the tank. If you look at the little picture here to the left, you see there the gasket, the black gasket's in the tank. And I see a lot of do-it-yourselfer stuff this way. It's just the way it is. And I think I've talked about this before. I won't dwell on it, but it is funny because we'll see things and say, well, I bought it at the store. It must be legal because I bought it at the store. You can buy that ball cock. Uh, Occasionally, you'll find that somewhere. They're pretty good about not selling that particular brand outright, but it can be fixed with that. So if you've got that in your toilet and it's not shutting off, and you go down and buy this $4 fitting, used to be $1. You buy that $4 fitting and fix that valve and put it back in the toilet, it'll continue to work. But it's a cross connection. It actually, the valve itself can siphon water from the tank into the drinking water, and we know this because people will turn on a lavatory faucet and get blue water out the spout. This thing here, the drinking water article, I wrote an article. This happens so much, they used to send out topics to the trades to see if they would want to write an article about it. And if you look like 3 articles down, why do I have blue water? I said, yeah, I'll do that one. Because I knew about it. I'd had it happen to me. And then I got a hold of the standards and so forth for the thing, and found out a lot more about the valves and how you can look at the valves and so forth. But anyway, this one, I actually talked to the guys at Fluidmaster one time. I said, do you sell that in the United States? He says, no. He said, we do sell it in Puerto Rico, which I thought was kind of weird. But anyway, he said, yeah, we do sell it in Puerto Rico. He said, they're a little different than they used to be. They have a check valve in them. Well, one check valve is not considered a backflow device. We have some backflow devices that have 2 check valves in them, but not the one check valve. So, they're not approved. This is, let me rephrase that. I bought this at Lowe's. I walked right in the store. I got one right here in the shop somewhere, right here in the school. I got one in a box. I just walked in and bought it just because I wanted to say I walked in and bought it. But that's actually, I used to love them when I was in the trades years ago, because you could stick a long screwdriver in there and adjust them and you were good. But these things will siphon as well. They do have a little check valve in them, but they're not considered approved. When you find one, if you want to verify that it's approved, the 2 that I showed you are the main ones you find out here that are not legit. But if you want to find one and prove it, look for the CL. The CL on the valve. CL, the one at the left there has a little CL near the bottom of the top. You see C and a line and an L, and the one at the right has the arrows pointing down. That's just for critical level. We adjust the water level in the tank to about an inch or so below that level, and that's why the CL is in there. And what I did was I happened to read in the ASSE 1002 information that I had there. It actually says they're supposed to emboss or stamp or something like that CL on the device. And so, that's, if somebody ever questions whether, well, why is that one approved and that one's not? The one on the right up here on this picture right now, it's essentially the same as the brown one, except they flipped everything. The cutoff point of the water is above the water now. The other one that was below the water. I bet you I sold 500 of those ones on the bottom, the brown ones, back in the probably late 60s, early 70s. I was just getting going in plumbing and stuff like that. I was working in the summers. They cost like $2, and we would buy them by the case, and they worked so good we thought they were great. But then, Then later on, you find out, oh, well, so that's why blue water is coming out of the faucet. It won't happen in a second, but that's where it came from. It came from the tank. So you knew water from the tank was coming out more so than that because everybody doesn't use the blue chemical. Some people use other chemicals that you couldn't really tell. And I get this all the time. People will say, well, it's not that big a deal to drink out of the tank. During the zombie apocalypse, I might sip some water out of the toilet tank, but until then, I ain't drinking it. So you never know what in the hell's going on in that thing. Um, let's see. By the way, sometimes you'll look at these things, you're like, man, I can't see them. This one here, I was looking at it and I thought, well, it looks perfectly legit. You can't really see that well in this picture, but that little tab sticking out actually has a CL on it. It has a CL on it. Here's something. This is do-it-yourselfer stuff. That little clip, some people apparently think that little white clip is to, when you open the box and you get everything out of it, that you're supposed to throw away the white clip because that's what a lot of people do. The problem is that is specifically to hold that's a refill tube to hold that tube up because if it's not above the overflow pipe there, a lot of times it'll go down in the pipe. And when it goes in the pipe, it will actually shut off. It'll siphon water from the tank and it'll go down the drain and then the toilet will refill again in a couple of minutes or so. And it'll keep doing that. And normally the call I would get as a plumber was they're frustrated. Hey, I changed the thing, it's not working right, whatever. And you could go there and all you knew they did was they just threw that thing away. If they had it, you would clip the hose and clamp it on above there, and it would take care of the problem. That hose cannot go down below, the top of that thing. It's got to be above that that overflow pipe. That refill tube does not go down inside. If it goes inside, it'll siphon. Um, Something I warn you guys about doing. I do it a lot of times when I do presentations. I don't do it. I don't do as much out in the field. I did bargain to do one the other day. I think with Kentucky. But I don't do that much. But I warn you guys, don't tell somebody when the toilet's loose on the floor, they probably just need a wax ring and a couple of bolts. A wax ring and especially the wax ring, it's not going to do anything but create a seal. It's not going to hold the toilet to the floor. It's just not going to do that. The bolts, maybe if you get lucky, but I bet you 50% of the toilets that I've worked on in my life, the flange was broken. So instead of well, today it would be like a $200 job, but back in the day, instead of it being like a $90 job or something to go there and put a wax seal under something like that, it would end up being $400 or $500 because we got to, deal with the flange and stuff. So the flange, we got a lot more ways to fix the flanges, but they're still going to be time consuming. I wrote an article one time for Journal of Light Construction. That's my nephew right there. We took the picture for the article, and then later on we realized no plumber's going to lift the toilet off the floor and leave the lid on it. But it was too late. We had already put the picture in. But anyway, that article had, I don't know, a dozen ways you could fix the flange. But the one thing was consistent. Every one of them cost more money than just popping the toilet off. So, if you tell somebody, they got a leak, toilet's loose on the floor, give them a heads up. It could just be a minor thing. It could be a major thing. But we honestly don't know. And I get asked this all the time. Do you caulk the toilet to the floor? The codes do say where it comes in contact with the fixtures come in contact with the wall or the floor, it should be made watertight. And then the next thing I'll get, a lot of guys will say, well, that's okay, caulk it all the way around, but leave a little opening in the back. And I had an opening in the back on one. I weren't one that I put in. I caulk them all the way around. But it was one that I inspected one time, and the opening in the back allowed the water from a supply tube to drip onto the floor and run through the little opening in the back. And it took a kitchen ceiling down because of that. And I looked at it and I thought about it. If it had been completely caulked all the way around, the water that hit the floor would actually have puddled in the floor and somebody would have seen it. They didn't see it because it was trickling down and going. It was almost like it was being guided through that little hole. So if somebody wants to do that, that's fine. They feel like if it gets loose, the water will squirt out, and then they'll know it's loose. My experience has always been if you get it set really good and you caulk it to the floor, and if you should happen to have tile on there or something, and you caulk it to the floor, um, it'll hold up a lot longer, many years longer, without you having to worry about a leak. It actually aids in holding it down. You're seeing them cut these wedges. If it rocks, the toilet has to be steadied. If it rocks, it'll smush that wax seal out from under there in no time. So he's getting ready to cut the little wax seals. A plumber's trick that we've used many times was we've actually used some pennies. You reach in your pocket, you grab a few pennies and slide them up under the edge of that, and then when you caulk it in, it does a pretty good job. And if you got a floor that's sometimes the tile is weird, it's kind of bumpy and stuff like that. I've put them down and I've grouted them to the floor. It's a little harder to clean it up later if you have to take it off the floor to do some work on it. But when you grout them and they don't sit on it for a few hours, it actually keeps it from rocking. And again, a good steady, a good solid fit, a good tight fit can happen. Um, I got kind of a pet peeve of mine is people will put the expansion tank on top of. They put the expansion tank on top of the water heaters in a conglomeration of fittings that's just not really strong enough. If if that was galvanized steel, yeah, that would be fine. That where we got now, I'd be afraid that would shear off. I've also seen this. I mean, I don't know what that is. Is it some kind of a basket or is it some kind of a light protector or whatever? But anyway, they got it hanging under there. And then the same thing here. These things, when the tanks do go bad, they fill up with water. They're kind of heavy, you know. They're heavy and they'll put a lot of weight on the thing. They make, I tell people they need to be properly supported. And if I would actually have a plumber ask me, well, how do I do that? I can't, I would say, go to a supply house and buy an adapter for that. They make these clamps. The one on the left is a little pricey, but the one on the right's not. It's got some big, you put the little bracket on the wall and then you put the big hose clamps around there and you strap it. It does a great job. It does a real good job and you don't have to worry about it flipping over and breaking loose, causing a flood. Um, that is a trap. The way it goes down, it does trap, but it's also, I guess, an S trap because they I don't know. I think some people open up the kits with the traps and the things like that in it, and their goal is to use everything in the bag. So whatever they had there, they wanted to make sure they used it all, and it's more or less upside down. A good trap. Basically, we're talking about P traps for most of these things. They should be non-siphonable, self-scouring. In other words, the water should swirl around in these traps and help clean the walls of the traps out. They shouldn't have internal partitions. No mechanical devices to form a seal. Some of our old traps used to have a big clean out plug on the top of them. The problem with that was that clean out plug could get loose and sewer gas could come out even when it wasn't leaking water. So you don't see these anymore, except on really old houses, like 100-year-old houses or something like that. Few corners as possible, contain sufficient water to prevent evaporation. That kind of was the way they went with the old traps. They were huge. They would hold a gallon of water or more. And they figured if they put a lot of water in there, if you put enough water in there, it wouldn't evaporate and the sewer gases wouldn't get in. The problem with that idea is though you end up creating like a sump. A whole bunch of the particles would settle to the bottom and you would just create this huge thing full of garbage and so forth. Least resistance to the flow of water. P traps do that. They work pretty well, and usually some way to clean them out. A lot of them will have a plug in them, like the ones we see under a lot of lavatories will have a plug in them, whereas others you can actually take the slip joints apart and just drop the whole trap out. And those are pretty cool. They're more prone to leaking because of the slip joint, but they're real easy to clean and they work really good if you're there to get a ring or some kind of jewelry out of the drain. They work really well. So how do they get dry? Siphonage, evaporation, capillary attraction or action. In other words, like mop strings hanging down in them sometimes can actually siphon some of the water out. Back pressure, momentum. That's usually what takes an S trap down. The water goes through there so fast it does that. I hear people talking about gusts of wind. I haven't seen it. I'm sure it happens though. Our goal as plumbers is we try to maintain water in that area there. You know, the dip of the trap to the wear of the trap is the trap seal area, and we try to keep water in there. You know, if it's a drain that gets used all the time, probably not going to be a problem. You know, it's probably not going to be a problem. It's going to constantly be getting primed. Usually, where we find drains um, that go dry and you never really noticed it, and then all of a sudden you do, is when the children move out of the house or they go to college or something like that, and you have a house with multiple bathrooms, and all of a sudden mom and dad, they're there by themselves and they smell sewer gas. And a lot of times it doesn't take but a few days, and in that trap, the water will get down below the dip. And once it gets down below the dip, the gases can go around it, like you see here, and they'll smell it in the house. So what we've always told our people when they would have that, we'd tell them, hey, look, you got 3 kids that are off to college right now. Just walk by the rooms and you know flush the toilet, run a little water in the lavatory, water down the tub or the shower, and you'll be fine. You know, but you don't see that, so it doesn't really alert you. You do see when vermin will come out, and not so much a mouse, but bugs. I'm sure many of you have gone into a vacant house before to do an inspection, and there would be cockroaches running around the house. Well, those are the same cockroaches that are in the manhole. And I've been in the manhole, and it would be must be 1,000 roaches in that manhole, and you're crawling, you're standing down there trying to do some kind of repair or something like that, and those things, and they know to go right up that sewer pipe, walk out an open drain in the house somewhere where there's no water in the trap. So they got to keep the water in the trap in order to prevent stuff like that.
5 minutes, Kenny.
Okay. And people say, well, what are we worried about the sewer gases other than the smell? There are some dangerous things, dangerous chemicals and stuff that can come up through the drain. And nowadays, you kind of worry about maybe a vehicle crash or something like that and dumping something in the sewer, that kind of stuff could happen. Normally, when people notice that they got a problem, when they notice that there's a problem, they feel fatigued. They realize when they're home for a few days, they feel fatigued, and that gas could actually be affecting the way they feel. And it's not like, well, I walk into the house and I start throwing up. That it's not necessarily like that, but that's a lot of times what would happen. Most people will smell it first. Most people are pretty good about that. But I mean, methane, if you got methane coming up in there, it is flammable. We all know it is definitely flammable. So
So when do we get drain flies, Kenny?
say again?
Drain flies.
Drain flies.
What about them?
I don't know exactly why certain drains, we actually have that happen. We actually have that happen here in this building once in a while. And there's chemicals you can flush down there, and I can't figure out how I'm wondering, maybe somebody knows a little better. Maybe is some of this stuff growing in the trap, or there are in the trap itself, because you do wonder how it would get by the water in the dip. I mean, we got, like I said, we have that problem here. Here, real quickly, and then I'll wrap up. Look at just a few pictures people have sent me. Double trap. The dishwasher is actually not trapped because it's going into the arm. It's not going into the trap. Here's a T lying the wrong direction here, and the water just runs by. And there is no trap. There might be a trap under the house, but there's no trap there. It's 2 lavatories, by the way. Here's another one, 2 lavatories. They've just lay fittings. They're using fittings like obviously they shouldn't use them. Real quickly, and then I'm done. This was something that could have been caught. This is something that could have been caught by an inspector if they had got a permit. I mean, we got fittings lying on their back that shouldn't be on their back, tees and so forth. The first arrow here points to a connection. He shoved a piece of 3-inch or whatever inside the cast iron. You can tell the cast iron, it looked like it was broken with a hammer. They didn't even, try to grind it down or snap it off or anything like that. That would have been a good place for a fern coat. Again, T on its back, T on its back. That's a pressure fitting, not a drain fitting. No, there a lot of the fittings. Some of the stuff has purple primer, some of it doesn't. Some of it's is what we call hot glue or wet and dry glue. There's a mixture of stuff, whatever they had on hand, I guess. But then there's one thing right here. Look at this. Look at this fitting. If you're not doing this every day, you might not see this. That's a 2-inch elbow with a bushing in it, reducing down to 1.5 inches, travels down and it goes into a 2-inch trap with another bushing in it. So it goes from 2-inch to 1.5 inches and then back to 2-inch. And of course, it's essentially an S trap because of the way they've got it set up anyway. But here's a good thing to keep in your head. Plumbing, we do not reduce plumbing drains as we move along. Sometimes we get larger, but we don't reduce them as you go along. You don't start out 3-inch and as you travel, then you go to 2-inch and so forth. With one exception, there's one exception I know of where we reduce the fitting, and that's this fitting right here. And that's a 4x3, we would call them closet bins. The old toilets used to actually have a 4-inch flange on it. And we would have a fitting it would have been cast iron back in the day, but that goes from 4-inch, but it goes straight down and it transitions to 3-inch. So it don't know it's going to a smaller drain, but that's the only place that I could ever think of where you could go smaller and it be legit. That it would be okay if you did that, and that would be right there. So if you see a drain being reduced as it's moving along, hitting toward the sewer or whatever, unless it's this particular type of fitting underneath the toilet, it's wrong.